I'm passionate about the idea that we have a community where we can do a lot more. You know, part of the professional business involvement was that I went to a bunch of the chief economist presentations where you heard about a society where there's been now 27 years of continual economic growth. That's great, but I also go back to Morwell, where I grew up in the 70s. I was recently back there for a school reunion, and that community's actually gone sideways and backwards socially. So what keeps me awake is the idea that we can do better as a country, that the idea that the dividends of that economic growth aren't being shared, that we're not providing opportunities for people across the community. And I think that's quite an unhealthy thing. And I think we can do these things better. Now, one of the privileged opportunities I had in the work at Social Ventures was to support organisations and programs and inspiring social entrepreneurs who made a difference. I mean, one organisation that always sticks in mind is the Beacon Foundation, who are an early founding partner of SVA's. And Beacon works on the idea that if you can engage community, and particularly employees, in tough schools and tough communities like the Mall that I grew up in, that you can actually make a profound difference. And Beacon, when we started to work with it in 2002, was in 6 schools. It started in Tasmania. It started in a tough part of North Launceston at Brooks High School, where 30% of the kids were dropping out and going on to the dole, to the unemployment benefit. And the visionary founders behind that, Bill Lawson and the young CEO Scott Harris, were infected by the idea that if you could change the culture of those schools, bring in employers, bring in people who cared about creating a better opportunity set for young people, that you could make a real difference. Now, the story has become part of SVA folklore, but what happened at Brooks High School was that in the first year of a program that brought in business mentors, that changed the trajectory of the young people in that school and infected that school with the idea that the kids could achieve, they could do anything, that changed the trajectory of that community. You know, in the first year of that no dole program, the number of kids leaving the school to the unemployment benefit dropped from 30% to 13%, then to 2%, then to 0. Now, so this was in the mid-90s, and when we engaged at SVA, what Bill Lawson and Scott Harris knew was that this program was working, but they had a real set of challenges in accessing the funding and the support to scale and grow that. And the work of Social Ventures was, they would say, deeply practically helpful and influential in enabling that program to grow from, it's now in over 150 schools around the country. And the results of that, the evidence is that as it did in Brooks High School so effectively in 93 and 94 and 95, it's changing the trajectory of lives around the country. So that's what inspires me, the idea that you can, in sensible and sensitive ways, bring business disciplines to make a difference to those communities. And Beacon, I think, continues to be an exemplar of how you do that effectively and how you grow that so that that scales out. I always remember a headline bit of advice that I was given in the early days when I was starting as founding chief executive at Social Ventures Australia. It was somebody who had a deep business background but had been very effectively involved in the non-profit social purpose world. And he said, Michael, you have to understand that whenever you walk into a room of people who are primarily from the non-profit sector, they mightn't say this explicitly to you, but there will be a thought bubble, which is, we don't care what you know until we know that you care. And so this idea that you must thoughtfully, patiently show that you actually care, walk the talk, engage really in a thoughtful and sensitive way, understand what's happening in those programs. It sounds cliche, but it's so profoundly true. You know, frankly, I still see a lot of people who want to tick a box. And the box is, I've had a busy, successful corporate career, I better be involved in the non-profit sector and I need to go in the board so that my CV will have on it, I've been on a non-profit board. I'm sceptical about that. And to me, the idea that when we want to engage, it has to come from the heart, it has to be very authentic. And the idea that we want to genuinely understand what's happening in those organisations is a precursor to a deeper level of involvement. And it's also a personal journey. Certainly for me, I was acutely conscious when I started at Social Ventures in 2002, while I'd had some involvements in the non-profit world, there was a huge amount that I didn't know about the sector. So that notion of a continuing learning journey was personally a really important thing to me, and I think became part of the cultural DNA at SVA. And it became a hiring screen. You know, we knew that people wouldn't work out with us in terms of the capacity to engage in the sector unless they were very patient and thoughtful and wanted to build a greater in-depth understanding. And I think that's the precursor to using the business skills that we have. You know, another question I got asked quite a lot was, how much of your prior business experience in private equity and at Macquarie was actually helpful and relevant in the work you did in the social purpose world? And while I said, look, that's a difficult thing to quantify, my answer was generally, I think probably 70%, sometimes 80% of what I knew commercially, professionally was actually directly relevant. But the 20 to 30% was very much about developing an in-depth understanding of the social purpose world. And unless you're very respectful and honouring of that to the sector, the chances of you engaging effectively, I think, become quite limited. The common denominators about those things which have worked incredibly well at SVA, if you look at the 15-year history, are pretty universal actually. So if you go back, I use Beacon as a poster child example of a successful and scalable social enterprise. What sits behind that, outstanding leadership, not negotiable. You must have outstanding, passionate people who have the capacity to drive the organisation. The second is a rigorous focus on evidence, what works, what doesn't, and an honesty and integrity about that. And the clue to that is organisations and programs which have demonstrated an ability to stop doing those things which don't work, and a lot of organisations fail that test. The third thing, I think, is the ability to partner effectively and to access talent from across the sectors. So again, sticking with Beacon, but this would be repeated in other highly successful exemplar organisations. They have partnerships which draw on commercial, social purpose and government expertise. And Beacon, to stick with them, have been quite effective in engaging with and lobbying with government. And my belief, given the significance of the policy and funding environment for government, is that the truly successful and scalable social enterprises have to be prepared to engage with government in a thoughtful and sensible way. So they're the three things that I'd regard as critical, and they're common denominators for all of those organisations that stand out. So my advice for somebody contemplating that journey, having had a career in the business world, that move, it sounds cliched, but how do we move from success to significance to developing a sense of purpose? I really feel strongly that this is about a heart connection. Be prepared to be patient, follow those things, connect to people who are working in, or those organisations that connect to the things that you feel strongly about. What is it that gets your headlights on? What is it that you care about? What is it that you get angry about? What is it that you want to change? And then I think at a practical level, be conscious of using the things that were no doubt part of making you as successful as you have been in the commercial world. Do your homework. Be prepared to spend a lot of time looking and talking to different people and different organisations in the areas that you're passionate about. And I think the fact of doing the sort of workshops that Ideology is offering is a really important part of that. This market is actually becoming a bit more sophisticated, which is terrific. There are people and organisations who can help broker a path for you to understanding better the social purpose world. The other bit of gratuitous advice I would give is don't jump to go. Don't necessarily accept the first invitation you've had to join a non-profit board. Do your homework, understand the programs, get immersed in the organisation. I have seen quite a few examples of people who've rushed into joining a non-profit board and then 3 to 6 months later pop out and say, oh, this has been quite frustrating. I thought this organisation would genuinely be interested in the sort of things that I might be able to bring. But really there's a sense that, hey, you come from the commercial world, you don't understand what we're about. And I think you can solve for that by being prepared to spend the time in the organisation, it'll better equip you of an understanding of what their gaps and challenges are, and particularly as to whether this is an organisation where the leadership is such that they want to engage with you, that they will know how to use your talents and what it is that you can contribute. And good luck. I think there's an enormous opportunity set out there for me, and certainly from my point of view, there hasn't been a day since I started at Social Ventures where I've thought other than this is really what I want to be doing. And it's a really unusual day where I don't get inspired by seeing something which is really connected to that idea that there are an extraordinary number of people who are passionate about what they do, who are making a difference. And it's fantastic to be part of that, to have a sense that you can connect to people and to organisations who have the ability to change the fabric of the country for better.